All right, aquatic weeds. Again, we'd all like our ponds maybe to look like that. That one looks pretty good. Before we know it, we got this. You know, we got invasion by weeds and more than one species, obviously. So, you know, kind of question, you know, is why do these things become such a problem? Well, what do plants need to grow? They need water, it's a pond. They need sunlight, we don't shade them. And finally, they need nutrients in ponds and nutrient sinks. We have literally created a perfect environment for aquatic vegetation when we build a pond. And then we're always surprised when we get weeds. Now, if you build it, they will come. All right. The other thing that's so frustrating about aquatic plants is they're so invasive, and one of the reasons is they have just this myriad of ways of propagating themselves. Many of them produce seeds and propagate by seeds. Many of them can just break off a fragment and propagate from that fragment, especially some of the submerged stuff. Many of the emergent propagate from root shoots and everything and can expand like that. Some of the submerged do too. And some of them actually just put off vegetative babies. So, and some can do all four. Hydrilla can do all four. Okay. Here's a good example of alligator weed. That stem lays down, and every place it touches a node shoots out a new plant. Non-native, very invasive, tremendous problem in South and Southeast Texas. Banana lily. This is a native, and I've never seen one as mean as this in my life, I don't think, sometimes. This thing breaks off and floats away, and these little banana-looking things are like pea pods. And as it breaks away, these rupture open and scatter seeds. And then when this thing gets over to shallow water, it re-roots. You know, I saw this thing cover up about a 100-acre lake in 5 years. They had to dredge the lake. It cost them, I don't even know, somewhere in the neighborhood of $500,000. And here we come with, what is the problem? Why can't we kill these things? This is a root of calla lily or spatterdock. Here's the leaves. Now you tell me what herbicide you're going to spray on these 6 leaves that's going to kill that thing. That's why repeated treatments, we keep saying, you're not going to get this stuff usually the first time, you're going to have to do repeated treatments. Here's why. You've got to kill the root. And almost all these emergents have these tremendous root systems. It's very difficult to kill. So we've got problems, folks. I talked about lotus when we were down there singing. I don't know, most people were down there. You know, this is the lotus. This is the best picture. We're a big old flower, the little seed pod heads and all that stuff you see sticking up here, big old leaf. Like I say, those seeds can sit underwater for up to 50 years before they germinate. So if you get lotus, get after it quick, because otherwise you're going to spend the rest of your life killing it. We talked a little about hydrilla in the public waters. We don't have a lot of hydrilla in private waters because hydrilla moves by people. Every once in a while I see it in private waters where somebody's taken their boat someplace to a public reservoir, got it in the boat thing somehow, brought their boat back to their big private pond and inserted it. And so every once in a while we see it in private waters, but I just don't see it a whole lot. The big problem in public waters, again, it propagates all 4 of those ways potentially. Coontail is a native that's kind of interesting because it can propagate from seeds. It propagates very well from fragments, and as a matter of fact, these fragments can break off and never even bother to re-root. It can be a floating, submerged plant and do just fine its entire life, just absorbing nutrients directly out of the water. Now, it will re-root, it can, but it doesn't have to. Here are the questions I believe everybody's got to answer before they go out and start treating plants, especially chemically. First off, you've got to know what it is. Second, then you've got to determine what's going to control it or suppress it or whatever. Are there environmental consequences? We talked about grass carp. I'm a big believer in grass carp. I probably cause more grass carp to be stocked in Alabama and Texas than maybe anybody. I like them. I use them. They're a tool. But when you put them out there, they're liable to make that lake bare. They're liable to take every last stick of vegetation out of that pond you got. Well, that's consequence. You got to put some structure back in, probably, or something like that. When it comes to herbicides, there may be some water use restrictions, especially on livestock watering and things like that. So again, if you've got a pasture that the only water for your livestock is that tank, that may take some of these chemicals off the table. You cannot use them. Finally, you want to know what they're going to cost, and I can tell you they're all going to be expensive. Okay, just the bottom line is herbicides, aquatic herbicides are expensive, pretty much all of them. All right, but that first critical step is identification. We usually just divide it up into these 4 groups pretty much for identification purposes. We have the algae, floating plants, submerged, emergent, and shoreline. And here's some fairly simple definitions. Again, algae are very, very primitive plants. They don't bear seeds. They don't have true root stems or leaves. Although some of them look like they do. Floating plants mean the entire plant floats. It's not talking about a lily pad where the leaf floats but it's rooted in the ground. That's not a floating plant. Submerged are all mostly underwater, and a little bit may stick up, but they have real flaccid stems like cooked spaghetti. And then emergent is everything else. Stiff, rigid stems, usually along shoreline, stand up, everything from water lilies on. Some of the algae, again, we've talked about some of this, the microscopic, the planktonic algae that we've talked about, filamentous, the stringy or hair-like stuff. We even saw either Nutella or Cara down at the pond when we were down there. We're not exactly sure which. But often you get, again, combinations of these. I believe this is Cara underneath with filamentous on top, and again, filamentous. That's why it gets its name, because it's little filaments. A lot of people call it pond scum or whatever. This is what Cara looks like. Cara has a common name of skunk grass or skunk weed sometimes, because this is one of the few aquatics that has a pretty foul smell. It kind of smells like you took mud and mixed it with a little garlic. So if you actually get this up and kind of crush it and stick it under your nose, and it just about knocks your head off, it's probably Cara. Okay, skunk grass. But it's an algae that doesn't really look. It looks more like one of the submerged plants, but it's an algae. So again, you got to know what you're doing, or you'll treat it wrong. Floating plants, some of the natives are the duckweeds, watermelon, mosquito fern. The non-natives are the salvinias that we talked about, both common and giant water lettuce and water hyacinth. This is duckweed. This is water meal. Water meal is the smallest flowering plant in the known universe. Aquatic. Super hard to kill, or fairly hard to kill. We've got some new chemicals that are actually pretty good at it. Mosquito fern, that's what it looks like. It starts out kind of green in the spring and early summer, and it kind of turns reddish brown. You've probably driven past ponds like that. If you see this green plugging on it, and then as the summer goes along, it kind of turns reddish brown. That's mosquito fern. It is a fern. And so is giant salvinia and common salvinia. And we showed this earlier. This is what giant salvinia looks for when it's in the what we call tertiary stage. It's fully mature and all that. Essentially, this plant is sterile. This plant has 5 chromosomes. It's effectively sterile. Even though it's a fern, it should reproduce from spores. The spores are sterile. It reproduces strictly from fragments, but a fragment can do that in about 30 days. This is particularly an East Texas problem. It likes acidic waters. You live in East Texas, you have acidic water. We've seen it start to migrate outside of East Texas a little bit, but we're not seeing the problems when it gets out of the acidic waters that we see in acidic water. This is in some of our big reservoirs. We're seeing it more and more in small impoundments. The spores aren't viable. How's it getting there? On the backs of turtles, on the legs of herons, somewhere or other, on the backs of alligators. It's moving from rivers and public water systems into private water. Again, I showed that earlier, how there's just no oxygen underneath that because there's not enough ways for oxygen to solve into the water. Water lettuce is another one. I don't see a whole lot out here in East Texas usually. It's a South Texas. It's a coastal plain, mostly problem. But we do have water hyacinth, right? And water hyacinth, one of the frustrating things about some of these plants is the amount of water they transpire. In other words, to cool themselves, they pump water out of your tank and they evaporate it off their leaves to cool themselves, just like the old evaporative coolers that we used to use out in West Texas that we called air conditioning. To the point where a water hyacinth, and there's a lot of different research studies, but basically doubles or triples the amount of water loss you would have if there was nothing there. They're literally pumping the water out of your pond. And so when we get into these drought years, and water hyacinth isn't alone in doing this, I'll show you another slide in a minute. When we get in these drought years, this really perplexes our drought problems, because you're losing water 2 or 3 times faster than you would lose if it wasn't there. So another real reason to control some of these things. The emergent plants, all of these are partial lists, but we saw a bunch of these pondweed out there at the nursery and stuff. I don't have American on here, but that was out there. We talked about hydrilla, bushy pondweed, some of these others. And here they are: coontail, egeria, hydrilla, bushy pondweed. They start to all look alike, coontail. So this is why people call these moths, right? I get that call all the time. Got moths in my pond. What do? I didn't tell him much. I could get down a little narrower than that. Anyway, the point is these things are hard to identify. You need some kind of help usually. This is bushy pondweed or southern naiad. Extremely common, as is coontail. Both natives are extremely common. Here's the trouble when we treat these. And this is, I talked about water quality and oxygen earlier. You look at many of these things like coontail, bushy pondweed, hydrilla especially, you're looking at 8 to 14 tons of vegetation per surface acre if we're working in 4 to 6 feet of water. How many of you cattle guys like to grow that much Bermuda grass? Think of that. We go out there with some herbicide and we treat that and we kill 10 tons of vegetation and it starts to rot. Within a matter of a few days, it's going to rot to the extent that it brings that oxygen down to critical levels, and you have a massive fish kill. Believe me, I've had that call from you guys. This mannered hen yelling at me over the phone, "That chemical you prescribed killed all of my fish." If the chemical killed fish, it wouldn't be legal, first off. And second off, as soon as I asked you, you treated it about 3 days ago before the fish died. It took 3 days to get that stuff rotting down to the point that it took the oxygen out. And you can kill fish. There's more fish killed by improper herbicide treatments than almost anything else, right, Billy? We've really got to be looking at how we treat these and being careful how we treat them, and particularly if we're using fast-acting herbicides. I'm going to get back to that in a minute. Emergent plant, again, partial list, everything from cattail, giant reed, lilies that we've talked about, willows. Again, there's alligator weed once it blooms. Check that picture. Cattails. It's not a matter, again, do I have cattails? It's a matter of when you're going to get cattails. Because those seeds in this catkin are airborne and they can literally blow hundreds of miles in front. And all they got to do is fall into your pond. And sooner or later they will. The lilies here, some of these, again, we showed the banana lily earlier. There's the one that we had out in the hatchery. The white or fragrant water lily. I think you also had yellow water lily out there somewhere. Oh, spatterdock. Yeah. Oh, that's spatterdock. Okay. But anyway, these are some of the common native water lilies. There's lots of sedges and rushes out there. This is bulrush. It's about 8 feet high. Some of the sedges can be a little invasive and very, very difficult to kill sometimes. Now, we've got a few exotics in that group too. Primrose, water primrose. Again, a bunch of different species. Interesting thing about primrose is it grow up on the bank and it'll grow out in the water. Again, there's different species of it, but how many of you have used Aquatic Plant, the website? Well, the reason I built Aquatic Plant is because of this critter right here. It was a Friday afternoon, about 1999. It was August, about 4:30. I should have been gone, unfortunately, I wasn't. And I got a call, and it was a gentleman. He sounded elderly. And he said, "I got this weed." I said, "All right, tell me about it." And I bet I had 30 calls that week, and every last one of them had been primrose. I have no idea why, but primrose was growing like crazy, I guess. And he says, "Well, it's in runners going out from the bank in the pond." I said, "Stop right there." I said, "You can see the runners, and they're kind of a reddish purple color." He said, "Yeah." I said, "You can see the roots hanging off them in the water." He goes, "Yeah." I said, "The leaf is kind of rounded." He goes, "Yeah." I said, "It's got a little yellow flower with 4 petals about the size of a nickel." He goes, "Yeah." I said, "I ain't got a clue." He didn't laugh. He didn't think the Aggie was funny on Friday afternoon. I decided I need to build a website so I didn't have to talk to people. So that's why I built Aquatic Plant. Waterleaf is an interesting one because it's about the only one that's got little thorns on it. So you grab it and it'll grab you back. But it's a beautiful little plant. Again, around the edge it may become problems. Here's one that's really causing a lot of problems more and more in the state. It's a rundo, giant reed. It's super tall. This is the Rio Grande Valley. You think you want to catch smugglers and illegal immigrants in that thing? I don't think so. The other thing is, here we go, evapotranspiration. That's what that big scientific word is for more evaporation than normal. This is what we think the Rio Grande Valley would be like if we had native vegetation. This is what we think Arondo's doing. Rio Grande Valley is kind of a dry area. We've got trouble. Willows are the same way. A lot of people let willows get on their pond, especially their dam. Don't let any woody vegetation grow in your dam. It's poking holes in it. Come on. Built the dam to hold water. Why would we let something poke holes in it? Increased evaporation, again, up to 2.5 times normal. So again, you get in these dry years, these willows are just pumping water out into the atmosphere, making the pond go dry faster. So control willows, especially on the dam. Some of these plants that we've talked about, these non-native, are against the law to do all this thing, but notice it's even against the law to possess them and any hybrid of them and stuff. So some of these you are not supposed to have. And this is a partial list, but this is the ones that I see pop up more than anything. Hydrilla, water, milfoil, some, again, hyacinth, lettuce, and salvinia, and giant duckweed. I didn't show you giant duckweed. Just be aware that some of these get to your pond, you are actually supposed to get them under control and try to eliminate them based on law, state law. So when we get ready to treat these things, what do we got? Well, first off, we can try to prevent them from getting there. And some plants, it's not that hard to prevent. We can maybe use fertilization, which will enhance our food chain. In some cases, we can even use dyes. But once we get them, then we look at integrated control, either using some kind of mechanical control, herbicides, or possibly some sort of biological control. Prevention, again, fertilization. And the whole thing, and Billy talked about this when he talked about fertilization, is you shade them out. But if they're already near the surface, you cannot shade them out. So you've got to start fertilization before they start growing or before you have a problem. It is a prevention more than an elimination thing. Dyes work like fertilization, but they absolutely do the opposite to the food chain. You're reducing that natural food chain that I talked about earlier this morning, from phytoplankton to zooplankton down the list, because you're shading out even the phytoplankton. If I got a bass pond or somebody's talking to me about bass, I never, ever, ever recommend dyes. The other side of that is I got a catfish pond or hybrid sunfish pond and all I'm doing is feeding them anyway, then sure, let's dye it. I don't care about natural food. And again, I'm a promoter of grass carp. I admit that. I worked on the Conroe project. You can beat me up later if you want to. They took the hydrilla out. You cannot deny that. You want a preventative thing? You got a new pond, doesn't have any weeds, stock 5 grass carp per acre. You're not going to have any weeds. They're going to run around that pond looking for anything that sprouts and they're going to eat it. It's a preventative measure. You can still fertilize, right? They can't eat that. You worried about them getting, I had people one time say, well, what will happen to the grass carp? What will they eat? I don't care. But if you care, feed them some fish food. But if you care, feed them some fish food. We raise them in hatcheries on fish food, right? They're not going to forget that. That's one of the other complaints about them. People get them out there and then they're trying to feed their catfish and the carp are coming up eating the catfish food. They're not going to forget it. They're going to eat the fish feed if you throw it out there. Fertilizers, Billy talked about, I won't go into that. There's some of the dyes. Aqua Shade is probably more of a common one. I love this. You want to dye your pond black. And see many people do that. But people do that with water gardens, actually. Mechanical cutting, if you're not eliminating the plant normally. There are some cases where if you kept cutting it long enough with some of the lilies and stuff, you could eventually starve that root to death, but it'd take a long time. It's fairly expensive, time and labor-wise, doesn't eliminate it, so this is my own quote. If you like mowing your lawn, you're going to love mowing your plant. Because, again, many of these things regrow from fragments, so it's not enough to cut it. You got to cut it and you got to rake it out. I just don't see many people with the wherewithal to stick to that. I get that call all the time. People are good people that decided they don't like chemicals or whatever, and they'll call me and they say, where can I get one of these mechanical cutters? And they make little small ones like this, and I'll send them, I'll tell them where they can get them. And about 2 months later, they call me back and say, what was that herbicide that'll kill that plant? Because they are so tired of raking this stuff out, they don't know what to do. If you want to go that way, go that way, but you better be committed, and you better have plenty of time on your hands, and you better be ready for the gym membership or something, because it's work. Biological control, there's lots of things we're working on, a lot of research on insects and bacteria and fungi, but really here in Texas, in your private ponds, you've got two choices. You've got the triploid grass carp, and you've got the Mozambique tilapia. Okay, and we've talked about both of these some today. With the grass carp, you have to have a permit. With the Mozambique tilapia, you don't need one. With the grass carp, when you sign that agreement, you have signed an agreement of the state of Texas, the Parks and Wildlife say, well, you will build an escapement barrier over your emergency spillway to keep those fish in your tank. And it's amazing how many people buy those carp and forget to build that. And then they wonder why they leave. Because they will. They're river fish. They don't want to be in that tank. They'll follow that moving water and they'll leave. Again, what they're really good for is most submerged vegetation, effective control for about 5 years. That's about it. You start seeing mortality at year 3. And by year 5, there's not enough of the triploids left to do you any good. That's what the beast looks like. It's not a common carp, doesn't have this lower mouth. It's got a fairly small mouth, hard to eat a water lily, won't cover it. There's the Mozambique tilapia, and we talked about that. What about the herbicides? As of today, basically have 13 legal registered active ingredients, of which there's some aquatic label. Many of these only have a single aquatic label, others have multiple aquatic labels. So these are just the active ingredients. And then we can break those up into ones that are fast-acting contact herbicides. Contact means exactly what it sounds. You touch that plant, the area you touch will die. And they're very effective on certain types of plants, particularly annual plants, but they're very fast-acting. So again, these are the ones you've got to really be careful with. If you've got this 10 or 12 tons of vegetation per acre, you've got to be extremely careful using these herbicides, especially as we warm up in the summer and you got more and more coverage. If you're going to use these, you need to use them early or use them in sections. Then we got the systemic. These are much more slow-acting. Sometimes you can get away with treating larger areas depending on which one of these you pick here. Better for controlling the perennial or woody species, but we've got lots of those. So again, you've got to make sure you know the plant and then look at what's recommended for that plant. With algae, most of these floating and submerged, you're going to usually have to treat it in sections, especially if you wait too long. If you get on it early in the spring, pretty quick here, maybe you can do a whole pond treatment. Again, usually repeated treatments. Emergent or shoreline, again, you may have to do it in sections, depending on what you do, usually repeated treatments. And sometimes you can do a better treatment in the fall of the year with some of these emergents. And basically, you're letting the plant help you because, again, with most of these, you're going to use these systemic herbicides. A lot of these systemics, not all of them, work by killing the root system. Well, what does the plant do in the fall? It's pulling things out of the leaves and storing them in the roots. And so it'll actually help you. It'll help you carry that herbicide down to the root, and you'll get a better kill. Not always, not with the wrong herbicide, but in some cases. Here's the monkey wrench in the whole thing. We have new laws called National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, federal law, that decided through court cases being sued that aquatic herbicide going into water eventually gets into public waters, therefore it needs a discharge permit. It wasn't my fault, guys. I testified against it several times. We didn't win. This is an EPA law, and it says that there are certain regulations. Here in Texas, it's through the TCEQ, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. My Aquatic Plant website has some of this. Here's some of the general stuff. Here's what it boils down to. If you're treating more than 1 acre at a time, you have to have, it's not really the permit that grants you permission, it's kind of a form you've got to fill out, and you print it off, you fill it out, and you keep it as a record, kind of like these pesticide applicator things. You've got to keep those records. On this, if you're treating more than 1 acre at a time, you've got to have a record. Okay, they give you the form, and you print the form off, fill it out, you keep it. But if they ever come along and ask you for your records and you don't have them, you can face some pretty stiff penalties. Believe it or not, TCEQ did us a favor. These restrictions are much greater in most other states than we have in Texas. You know, we still got to live with this. Boy, compared to California, some of those, we were walking on the water here. You need to be aware of it. If you're treating more than one surface acre at a time, you're going to have to do this. If you're treating more than 100 surface acres at a time, then you have to get a permit. And that's much more involved. Nice thing about that is you've got a 400-acre lake, treat 90 acres. Believe it or not, the next day you can treat another 90 acres. Yeah, that's the way the law's written. Like I said, they've been kind to us in many ways. That's part of the law. Okay, I get a lot of questions about stuff like this. Barley straw. Anybody tried barley straw? Nobody's going to admit it. Did it work? No. No. Barley straw does not work. They sell it, it doesn't work. Here's one I like. Sonic algae killers. I actually, when this idea came out, man, I read up on the theory and I liked it. I said, you know, this may work. Had a company call me and said, we'll give you one to test. There it is. Is it working? I'm sorry, you know, I just don't think it worked. He had called me back. I sent him the report. We talked about this. You know, you want to plant. I planted I like water lilies. And this was going to be a real pretty yellowy peach one. I planted a bucket, shoved it out in my pond, the damn turtles ate it 2 days later. Amazing what a herbivore will do when it has nothing else out there to eat. Sometimes you're going to have to protect them. But if you want an aquatic plant, I like water lilies. I like planting them in a bucket. And we talked about both of these. I like American Pondweed. If you don't mind it ringing your pond, but it'll only ring it to a depth of maybe 3 feet at the most. It is usually thin enough that fish can move through it. It really doesn't stop the bass from foraging very much. And then again, for shoreline stuff, and you can see, again, this stuff doesn't get real thick. That's that water willow. It has a really pretty little flower on it. And if you've got problems with erosion around your shoreline, this may be the plant of choice. I spend my life killing weeds, okay? I really, truly do. But there are some that aren't so bad. And there I've given you my 3 choices. This is Aqua Plant. This is the website. The URLs are all in your information, everything. When you open it, that's the way it looks. Again, you've got these applying for permits through TCEQ. You've got all sorts of buttons over here, frequently asked questions. You can go to plant identification. It talks about algae, floating plants, submerged. If you know what plant you're looking for, you can go to quick things like this and find it in a hurry. If you know what plant you're looking for, you go straight to the alphabetical index and pick it out. If you don't, you work your way through. You come with photographs and drawings and simple descriptions. Always look at this other photos because we have photos. Sometimes these plants look very different in different kinds of water, different hardnesses or opacities of water. But eventually you say, that's it. That's the plant. I got, in this case, I picked coontail. I've got coontail. And you work your way down through here. It talks about fertilization. It talks about shading. It talks about these mechanical controls. You keep going, and it starts talking about herbicides. And it gives you my recommendations based on myself and many other people that are herbicide applicators and people that work with this industry that I believe and I trust and I work with until I get you what I consider very good recommendations. E means excellent. Means that I think if you follow that label direction, you've got a 90% to 95% chance of controlling that plant. G is good. I think you've got an 80% chance. I don't give you any below that. But every one of these is a hot button. Every one of these takes you to the manufacturer's website. And the manufacturer's website will have the labels. And so you can click on that, and now you can read that's the law. That is the law right there. It tells you how to apply it, when you should and when you should not apply it, what the water use restrictions are, what the application techniques are, what plants it will control. And you can read that, privacy of your own home. It will tell you that after today, all your children will be born naked. You know, things like that. It's law. And that's what Aqua Plant's for, to help you make decisions.